The season is off and running for the Texas Longhorns on the hardwood in their first season in the SEC, helping us break it all down. One of the best in the business when it comes to talking all things Texas, especially on the basketball side. A good friend of mine, Keenan Womack. He's a contributor with Texas Sports Unfiltered, Fan Nation, OB Wire, you name it. Again, the man knows all things Texas hoops. Keenan, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time. Excited to talk all things Longhorns with you.
Hell yeah, man. I'm glad you had me on, dude. This is going to be fun. We had a lot of fun the last time we hung out, so I figured this would be fun too.
Yeah, I don't know if the Texas basketball season's been quite as fun as a night on 6th Street, but we're trying to get there. We're trying to get there. Obviously, big year for Rodney Terry and the boys. I first want to start, Keenan, with this. Let's talk the non-conference slate first. Then we'll dive into conference play. Obviously, Texas sits right now 12-6 overall, 1-4 in the SEC. And I'll even zoom out 30,000-foot view, Keenan, because when Texas came to the SEC, naturally, all of the attention was on football and what it meant for the football program. But what was your overall outlook, Texas basketball coming to the SEC? And I guess how surprised have you been, Keenan? Because nobody saw the league being this good this year. And I'm sure from Texas fans I've talked to, they said, the Big 12's a gauntlet coming to the SEC. It's still really good, but maybe it'll be a little bit more forgiving. And I feel like it's been even worse, right? Like the league's never been as deep as it is. So your overall thoughts on what it meant for Texas basketball coming to the SEC and what stood out to you, what surprised you, what have been your biggest takeaways being in the conference for the Horns at this point?
Yeah, I think I might be in the minority in that coming into this conference. I thought this season would be harder than the last seasons in the Big 12, just because I think the biggest difference between the SEC basketball now versus what it was for the last 20 years is the coaching level is so much higher. You have Nate Oates, you have Chris Beard, you have Bruce Pearl, you have Todd Golden, you have I would even throw Dennis Gates in there. I think he's doing a great job at Missouri, especially considering they went 0-18 last year. Now they're very competitive, just beat Florida. So you look at the conference coaching level is so much higher than it has ever been. And you saw that with the success in football. The SEC was like, man, screw it. Let's just pour some resources into basketball. And now they're dominating in basketball too. It's just, there's so much money in athletics in these southern states. As far as Texas fit, I figured this would be a tough year. I came in, I picked them to finish 9th in the SEC, and that was generous, I thought. And that's what I said when I posted my preseason rankings. I was like, I have Texas 9. I think that is an optimistic look at what they're going to be. I thought they'd probably finish 12th or so, and that's what it's looking like they're going to finish. Looks like they're a little bit better than Arkansas, maybe LSU, maybe Vanderbilt, maybe South Carolina, but they're in that tier of teams right now just because they can't get to the rim. Mm-hmm. And that's like the major problem. But we won't zoom in that quick, that close, that quick. But yeah, those are my main thoughts. It's like I figured this would be a gauntlet. And especially you look at the first 5 games, all 5 of those teams that they played at one point or another were top 15 KenPom teams. So it's like you're going to lose some of those games, but the way they've lost is the thing that concerns me.
So, Keenan, before we get into SEC play again, I want to start with non-conference because obviously that set the tone or set the stage, if you will. Texas goes 11-2. That opening season or opening game loss to Ohio State, I think one that was kind of surprising, if you will.
Yeah.
Then lost to a top 25, of course, UConn team. But what were your takeaways from non-conference play? Anything that jumped out to you, surprised you? I know, obviously, one of the big stories, Tre Johnson, the true freshman, who's been fantastic, averaging over 18 points per game out of Garland, Texas. But biggest takeaways from the Longhorns in non-con?
Paper tiger, man. That was a very inflated 11-2. They played, I think, 7 teams in the bottom 50 of KenPom. They were beating up on the little sisters of the poor, as people call it. You know what I mean? Like they just weren't playing good teams, and the good teams they played, they lost to. Really, their only win of value that I saw in that I call it preseason because that's essentially what it is. But pre-conference slate was they beat St. Joseph's and they beat Syracuse. And St. Joseph's and Syracuse each has like an NBA dude on their team. St. Joseph's has Rasheer Fleming, who's going to be like a top 20 pick, but they don't have anything else. And then, Syracuse has Donovan Freeman, who's like a borderline top 30, 40 guy in the NBA draft. But they hadn't played a team that was like a machine. They hadn't played an Auburn, for example, who I think is the best team in the country right now. I just was not inspired by their pre-conference slate. Not just the fact that the teams weren't quality, but I just saw a lot of glaring issues early on in this season. I saw an inability to attack the rim, saw an inability to rebound effectively, and I saw an inability to defend the paint effectively. And those are three things that in college basketball you have to be able to do, especially in a conference like the SEC that's packed with physical teams. I mean, you look at the top teams in the SEC, they're all physical teams. Even a team like Florida that's guard heavy, driven by their guards, they still have a guy like Alex Conda. You know what I mean? Like every single one of these top teams is super tough in the interior. Even if their numbers aren't crazy, they're still just bodying you. Even a team like Kentucky just bodies you. Like they're just physical in the front court. Texas just doesn't have that.
So you can look at conference play, Keenan. That leads me into that again. 1-4 right now as we sit and conversate here on this Monday, January the 20th. 1-4 in conference play. You open up conference play with a loss to your arch rival Texas A&M in College Station. But ironically enough, I find it ironic. Your one SEC win, the first SEC win in program history, comes against the Oklahoma Sooners, your other arch rival, at their place. But
nice.
very, very nice way. I don't know.
Not gonna lie, Chris, it was pretty nice to get that one.
Yeah, I don't know if Texas fans would have it much any other way, but you know, there's been some close calls. I mean, you gave Tennessee all they wanted, Auburn all they wanted. That's 1-2 essentially, respectively in the polls. But you know, blowout losses like I mentioned to A&M, to Florida. What have you seen in conference play first off? You mentioned not being able to attack the rim. That's obviously a big piece of this, but is there any reason for optimism in your mind that Texas can get things wrong? Because again, you look at the schedule, what's crazy about this league, Keenan, now you got 22nd ranked Mizzou. You got A&M again, at Ole Miss. At LSU's tricky. I mean, the schedule is for nobody. It's not forgiving for anyone. Is any reason for optimism in your mind that Texas can string some things together and get rolling? Because it seems like all season long, they've been right on that first four out, maybe next four, but like kind of fighting for the bubble, but obviously got to stack some wins together.
Yeah, I think some of the things they did against like Tennessee and Auburn can be converted into first of all, they play much better at home. Like that's just facts. Like they just play way better when there isn't a crowd that goes crazy every time they turn it over, because they turn it over a lot. Like they just, you know, I think what I've seen that I like is when they run first of all, they've been missing Kendall Weaver, which I think would have helped quite a bit against Florida, as he's a very rangy, athletic. He's not very tall, but like he just plays like he's bigger than he is. He's like kind of an off guard. He's a defensive focused, rebounding type of shooting guard who I think is going to make a professional career out of himself, whether that's the NBA or European League, whatever it is. He's just too good of an athlete and too hard of a hustler not to make it. But I think that would have helped immensely against a team like Florida, where they're so guard heavy with Elijah Martin and Walter Clayton Jr. So you have that aspect, but you also have the problem of, like I said earlier, man, they don't get to the basket. They don't take advantage of paint touches. They settle for jump shots so often. Like every possession is a jumper, a contested jumper usually. And I'm trying to think of things that like translate forward that they could use. One thing that I've noticed is like, I kind of dig when they run the double point guard lineup, when they run Julian Larry and Jordan Pope at the same time, just because it kind of gives you a mix of distribution with Larry and scoring prowess with Pope. And Pope has been the most consistent player in conference play, like pretty much hands down, in my opinion. I think he's been the best player on the team during conference play. He's just been, I think he had 27 against Oklahoma or 25, something like that. I have the stats in front of me, but he's one of the few guys on the team that can consistently attack the basket because he's a threat to pull up as well. When you have that threat of pulling up and you're quick off the dribble, you can get to the basket. And that's my problem with Tre Johnson as an NBA prospect. Is like, I don't necessarily think he's great at getting to the rim, and he settles for jumpers a lot of the time. He's constantly shooting contested fadeaway twos, and he hits a lot of them, but it's like, that's not a recipe for success, especially in a conference that's so talented in the front court. You look at some of these front courts, Janai Broome, Colin Murray-Boyles at South Carolina, Alex Condon at Florida, Cliff Omoruyi and Grant Nelson at Alabama. Like, there's just dudes everywhere in this league in the front court, and Texas just doesn't have front court guys that can match with those dudes.
So, Keenan, let's address the elephant in the room, that being Rodney Terry. where do we sit right now with the Texas Longhorns head basketball coach? What's the temperature of his seat, if you will? I know there were obviously expectations coming in year one in the SEC. We all know the situation of how he took over the previous regime and ending. And, of course, now we know where Chris Beard is at Ole Miss. They will face him in Oxford in a few games. But, Keenan, simply put, again, where do we sit right now with Rodney Terry? What's the likelihood he's back as Texas's head coach next season?
Next season, very, very slim. I mean, unless he really rallies this team and figures something out, I'd be really surprised if he was back. Just because.
And what does simply getting to the tournament at this point bring him back?
I don't think so, man. I think the writing's on the wall. Like, they just are not going to compete in this conference with this dude as the head coach. And, like, I don't want to sound like I'm negative. I love this guy. Like, he's a great dude. And I don't think he's equipped to be the head coach at UT right now. I just don't. And he struggled at UTEP. He struggled at Fresno State, both of which he was head coaches at. And it's just, there are better options. They're just straight up. There are guys that would be better suited to lead this program into the SEC. I mean, the thing with Chris Del Conte, the AD at Texas, is he is not afraid to cut your throat. Like, that dude is a serious about winning type of guy. And he does not screw around with like, if you're struggling, like, he fired David Pierce. Like, most schools would kill to have the success David Pierce had at Texas, and he just cut him loose like nothing. And same with Tom Herman. Like, Tom Herman wasn't great, but he won a Sugar Bowl. Doesn't matter. You're gone. We're bringing in Sark. Like, there's just no way that I see this tenure lasting that much longer, just because of the problems with not just the on-court product, but there's not a big crowd for these games. Like, the recruiting isn't great. Like, there are a lot of underlying issues here that are contributing to this program flailing. And, like, they have talent at guard and wing, but this front court is not an SEC front court at all. It's barely a Power 4 front court, if that. So you compound all those issues, and you just have a situation where it's like, this is not working. And if there's anything Chris Del Conte doesn't care about doing, it's hurting your feelings. Like, he will fire you at the drop of a hat if you're not performing and he has a better option.
I know, Keenan, obviously it's early to speculate when there isn't even an opening yet. But obviously, again, you're as plugged in as anybody when it comes to not just Texas basketball, but college basketball, the pro game as well. Are there any names in your mind specifically that you'd like to see Texas target, or you think just makes sense as a good fit?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, like, I have no idea if these guys would leave, right? So these are just dream hires. The obvious dream hire is NATO. I don't see that happening. But another guy that I really like is Brad Underwood at Illinois. I mean, again, I don't know that he would leave. He's got it pretty good there. He's recruiting. They have an NIL that supports what he wants to do. And what I'm looking for, if I'm Chris Del Conte, is a forward-thinking coach in the way that he recruits Europe. Because you look at a guy like Kasparis Yakuchonis, the point guard for Illinois, and that guy is going to be a top 3 pick in the NBA draft this year. Like, he's an absolute stud. He's like Malcolm Brogdon plus. He's just a complete everything you want in a big point guard. He just does it all. You look at some of the top scorers in other conferences too. You look at Vlad Golden. He's a top scorer in Big Ten play right now. I think he's from Russia. So, like, you look at Yegor Demin from BYU. He's a Russian kid who played for Real Madrid last year. Now, he struggled some in conference play, but that's neither here nor there. It's more about, like, the way that you're trying to build these rosters now, it's going to turn to European pro ball. And guys like Tommy Lloyd at Arizona and guys like Brad Underwood at Illinois are doing a hell of a job recruiting Europe. And I think that forward thinking is going to bring them a long way. Other than those two guys, I think Royale Ivy deserves a shot, at least an interview. Former Texas shooting guard, defensive player, played in the NBA for about 10 years. And now he's been an assistant I think he's with the Nets right now. And he coached South Sudan in the Olympics. And if you watch South Sudan in the Olympics, they played way above their level of talent. I mean, they were competing with France, with the U.S. I mean, they were like balling out. They were playing really, really good team basketball. And he helped coach Kamen Malawach, the center for Duke, who's been so awesome this year. He helped coach him. The issue I foresee with bringing in a guy like him is the recruiting game is going to be new to him. He is not a college coach. He is a pro coach. So my grand scheme would be if you bring in Royale Ivy, you throw the freaking kitchen sink at Jay Lucas at Duke and try to bring him back to the 40 acres and make him the head of your recruiting and just pay him an exorbitant fee and let him run recruiting. Because for my money, he's the best recruiter in college basketball. And I think if you combine those two elements, you could create a really effective program.
Keenan, at the risk of you laughing me off of the conversation, do you ever see a path for Chris Beard returning back to Austin?
No. So I'll give you a little insight. I covered that up close. I was writing for Rivals at the time. I was at the courthouse that day for like 2-3 hours. And I talked to a lot of people, and there's just no way that will ever happen. No way. And I understand why people, want it to happen. But like as a graduate, I would prefer that didn't happen. And I can tell you it will not.
Keenan, last thing, we'll get you out of here. Again, when you look at the rest of Texas's slate, like we said, 12-6 overall, 1-4 in conference play, difficult games obviously await. That's just the SEC this year. How has what you've seen to this point? You mentioned you were admittedly a little bit higher on them than you probably even felt like you should have been, picking them ninth. How has what you've seen to this point impacted your expectations for the rest of the season, either positively or negatively?
I mean, not to sound like I'm Nostradamus, but I saw like all these issues coming preseason. I just looked at the front court and I was like, this is not a competitive front court. Like there's a kid who went to Texas Tech, JT Toppin, played for New Mexico last year, playing for Tech this year. Absolute wizard on the rebounding, just a really, really talented interior scorer. NBA dude for sure, in my opinion. And Texas couldn't match him in NIL. There's a whole backstory to that I would love to get into, but can't because of certain obligations and sources and things like that. But like they just couldn't make it work with him. And I think if they had that guy, they'd be a lot more competitive because that guy's great on the boards. He's had a couple of 20 rebound games this year. And Texas' best rebounder is Arthur Kaluma, who's 6'6". He's a wing power forward. He's like a combo forward. He's their best rebounder, like by far. You have guys like Shedrick and Onyema who get a combined 4 or 5 boards a game. It's like, this is just not going to cut it against the Janai Brooms of the world. It's just not. And you look at the stat lines some of these centers are putting up. Rasheer Fleming had 20 rebounds against this Texas front court. He had like 16 points, 20 rebounds. I mean, Texas won that game, but like these are deep flaws in this roster that like I just don't see how they can overcome. And like I wouldn't be surprised if they won 5-6 conference games this year total.
Keenan Womack, Texas Sports Unfiltered, does a fantastic job talking all things Texas Longhorns. Keenan, just in case folks have been living under a rock, let them know where to check out all your great work.
Yeah, man. I'm at Keenan Womack on Twitter. I write for SI Mavericks. I write for SI NBA Draft. I contribute to a bunch of stuff, but Texas Sports Unfiltered is my main jam, and then I write for Sports Illustrated. So check out my stuff over there if you're interested in reading about prospects, things like that, or if you're a Mavericks fan, go check out my work, man.
Keenan, excited to continue to follow the Horns and excited always to chat with you, man. Appreciate you taking the time. We'll definitely do it again soon.
Absolutely, brother. I appreciate you, man.